two Amazon procurement women are back. And today, I think we're going to do a little bit of a different format, more of an interview style than our kind of standard back and forth banter, because I am very personally curious about what it's like to be a consultant in the procurement world. And Dr. Elouise, I know you have had a very different career path. So I think it would be really interesting to people, me included, to talk about how you even got into consultant. You're what I would call a very non-traditional consultant.
You're being very kind.
And then also, like, what is it like to be a consultant? And I want to start with here is what comes to mind to me when somebody tells me they're a consultant. I think of three things. I think they have a big ego. I think means they're complacent. So they just follow something in the box and rinse and repeat over and over. And I think that they live on the road. They travel all the time, which I think is unhealthy.
Yeah, okay.
So that's Sarah Scudder's thought process or perspective on when someone tells me that. And I have a lot of friends that are consultants. But so let's start. I want to start with the why.
Wait, can I tell you exactly what comes to mind when I think of consultants? And the first thing, and this has always been true, I think consultants are full of shit. That's my first like guttural reaction. So I understand that just as a level, I understand the skepticism, and it comes that my feeling comes from having worked in industry or before entering the consulting space, and having an experience where consultants came in and anyway. And then the other stereotype I have is that consultants come in, interview everybody, take everybody's ideas, and just present it back to the executives as the plan, even though all the data came from
and they do that and charge a ton of money when you could have just asked your own team.
Yeah, exactly. But nobody wants to listen to or believe the team. And by the way, that actually both sides are true. Oftentimes the team members know what needs to happen, but it's not until the outside people come in, take those ideas and repackage them that it sometimes needs the outside voice. So
and I think there's a trend that I'm observing, and I'd be curious your perspective, is that less and less folks want to be consultants.
Oh, no doubt.
So there's not hand raisers. Like when I started in the industry, I feel like being a consultant was kind of a cool hip thing, and there were people that were very interested in pursuing that profession. And now I feel like people are like, oh, I never want to do that, or I don't want to be a consultant. So and then the other thing is, I don't know a lot of procurement practitioners that are fond of working with a consultant. It's always like, oh, our CEO forced this on us and we have to do
it. Yes. Today's disclaimer is I don't speak for everybody or all consultants. And by the way, what I'm saying is not 100% reflective of Carney. It's just my experience and I feel like I'm an outsider. So a lot of my perspectives come from being an observer in a lot of these, and I spent many years just observing the consulting profession. Also, there's a social network for consultants called Fishbowl, and so I read a lot of stuff on there. So so what I'm talking about for the rest of this session is a mix of my friends that have gone to other firms, my experience, and what I read on Fishbowl. So, but to answer your question, yes, absolutely. Both in consulting and investment banking, there has been a huge shift away in the last few years from this just burn yourself out, make a ton of money, travel all over the place, basically work hard, play hard. And I think there's a little bit of a generational change here, but a lot of the consultants, I wouldn't say we struggle, but it's not the same plethora of hundreds of folks, of highly talented folks knocking down our doors.
Mm.
We still hire really all the firms. By we, I mean all the firms still hire really great people, but in general, it's a much harder. It's much harder to get them in, and more importantly, to acculturate them to
Mhm.
this lifestyle, because it is a lifestyle. And even in the time, and I've been with Carney just over 24 years, even in my time at Carney, that whole culture has changed where I've watched this. And younger folks don't really want to be, like, quite frankly, and I hate to be generationalist in this, but younger folks don't really want to be working these 18-hour, 20-hour, 7 days a week work weeks. It's just like the money is not enough of a motivational factor. I'll answer your second question, but I'll let you react to that.
Yeah, so I'll also throw in, I've never been a so I've done some marketing consulting, fractional CMO work, but it's very different than what we're talking about here.
Yes.
The other thing that I have seen just from interacting with so many procurement practitioners is that there's consultants out there that will everything's templatized.
Yeah.
And so
This
here's
is the bane of my existence.
here's the template, here's the process, and then they force or they try to use it for every client. And it's like that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And some of the things, the materials I've seen are super outdated.
Yeah.
So it's like if there's a generational challenge, I would also argue younger people coming and looking at this saying, well, this is, 20 years old. Why are we doing this? Why are we following this dinosaur archaic process?
Well, I think this is, you kind of hit on why I think procurement struggles to really effectively use consultants, because so much of the procurement changes. It's dynamic. That's what makes it great. Prices change, supply changes, capacity changes. All the stuff is, the businesses that we serve are always changing. And so oftentimes what consultants come in with, unless it's very specialized expertise, they're just bringing a playbook that most people, most practitioners have been doing: 7-step sourcing or category management plans, or fill in the blank, for decades now, and they don't need consultants. And when I went to Vodafone and did my interviews last year for my book, like, they don't really hire a lot of consultants. They'll do it for specialized things, but not for day-to-day procurement stuff. And I think that's one of the issues I have. Where I really have an issue, though, this is going to wind me up, is where you take that cookie cutter approach and you do it to systems. Because I think it's obvious now, whatever systems we do or don't use or buy or don't buy, you cannot tell me that every enterprise is the same and we just have one playbook for an ERP system or a source to pay system. It does not work. That is why we have such poor adoption of the legacy tech players, why we struggle with to adopt some of the startups. There is just no playbook that's one size fits all. And that cookie cutter approach is what just about every consultant walks in the door with.
So I think it might be, at least for me, it would be useful. I'd love to hear why you became a consultant. I mean, it was a long time ago, right? You've been doing this for over 20 years. So what happened in your career that you decided, like, I want to go do this? What was kind of the trigger moment for you?
Well, I was much like you. I was doing fractional consulting before I got into formal consulting. I just didn't think of myself as a consultant, but I was working with a lot of smaller companies around town, and and that was at the sort of, I was doing website development back in the late '90s when, yeah, as the dot-com boom was taking off.
So wait, when you say website development, were you actually, like, back in the day there wasn't WordPress templates like I use.
Correct.
So you were actually like coding.
Coding, yes. I'm old school that way. Like I actually remember the first versions of HTML and JavaScript, and I was doing HTML before cascading style sheets, or style sheets came out. So like witnessed the whole. That's how old I am. Is
So
like I
does this
witnessed.
mean you're an IT, you're kind of a geek nerd? Is that
Oh,
am I allowed to
totally.
say that?
Oh, totally. So, and the other thing I was doing, because I think I mentioned this in the opening episode, I worked for San Francisco Opera and I managed their online ticketing system and subscription renewal. So that was back in the day when Java was a brand new programming language and we were moving from mainframe. Uh, Collectively, we were moving from mainframes to these sort of server-based systems. So I actually know a lot about web technology in web servers, and for those that are nerds, Apache, and then Microsoft came out with their server ISS for those. So, like, I understand the underlying web technology just because I was fortunate enough to kind of come of age with it as it's being developed.
So you were a web developer slash coder. I'm gonna throw the coder in there.
So back then it was under this umbrella term of webmaster, but
Okay.
but it that's when it was. I mean, you got to go back to the late '90s. Like we're talking like Baywatch and anyway. So like that era. But so it was pretty cool back then.
Okay, so you were a webmaster. And then you had all these different clients you mentioned that you were doing websites for, it sounds like. Then how did you get acquainted with Kearney and decide to join their team? Because I mean, they're a major consulting firm.
Yeah. Uh, so I'll tell you my story, and then I think it is worth telling, explaining how most people get into the
Yeah.
consulting firms. So I, in as so I'm doing all my coding and webmastering and whatever else I'm doing, and and that's at the turn of the late '90s, early 2000s, when the dot com, and I'm here in San Francisco, so
Mhm,
it's like hot and you just can't go anywhere. The papers, back when we had newspapers, everybody's just talking about this,
mhm.
the what's happening. So I decided to go to a .com, and actually at the opera, our marketing manager left to go to a company called Abbreviate, which is a reverse auctions, was a reverse auctions tool. So one of the early competitors to free markets, which got
I was
acquired by
gonna
Reba.
just say
Yeah,
I know free markets.
yeah. So free markets was first, and a lot of our listeners worked for free markets at various stages because it got acquired by got acquired by Ariba and then by SAP. But so anyway, I went to work with Abbreviate, which was founded by some Carney consultants, and so and we had gotten funding from EDS, which was at the time Carney's parent, and so by the time we ran out of funding, then Carney took Abbreviate into folded itself in, and I had technical skills that was helpful to Carney, but I wasn't developing or managing the product because Carney spun the technology off, and so I just and so when I talk about being an observer for many years, I just sat there and sort of I was doing support and helping the firm adopt technology and
When you
explore some.
say helping the firm, meaning you were helping Kearney adopt technology for themselves to use or for
Yes.
their clients to use?
Well, for both. And so one of the uh, one of the big things that you do on projects is we call it a PMO, or program management office, and so that's where you manage all the tasks, all the documents, all the
Mhm.
thing. And this is when SharePoint and some of these early collaboration systems came out, where I would help the team set those up and then get clients onboarded and help the clients use them and help develop that. So these early collaboration systems, I spent a lot of time working on those, so that helped keep me in the mix. And then what came after that was data science and all this stuff, and so I was all of these, this, when I was doing all these PMO sites, it was all procurement related. I remember putting in like the 7-step sourcing process, which is like 156 sub steps, put, putting that into SharePoint and helping the teams deploy that with clients. And then when I moved to that got boring pretty quickly. But then I moved to data science where I was doing procurement and supply chain related data science.
Oh, very interesting. So you were almost like the in-house tech expert for Kearney.
Yes, but as applied to clients versus managing laptops.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, I want to go back and just say that's not the route most folks take. In
Yeah.
fact, so the route most folks take is, and I'm generalizing here because it's slightly different for every firm, but is you come out of undergrad usually from a well renowned institution, either with a business degree or
When
ideally an
you say
engineer.
well-renowned, you mean like the ones with the
Ivy,
big reputation.
yeah. So a Harvard, an NYU, a Chicago, UCLA, Berkeley, Stanford, those kinds of folks. You get the odd folks from Dartmouth or other sort of Rutgers or it's not a hard and fast rule, and every firm gets their juniors from different a different. So it's I don't want to be exclusive, just but you're competing against, or at least back in the day, you were competing against a lot of people. So every advantage you had was
So the
good.
school back in the day, what you're saying is the school mattered a lot.
Yeah, it did. I think it still matters, but I think it's maybe it's changed. I would say it's evolving now.
I would tell you
So
if I were hiring, I'd much rather have experience over what school you went to.
yes, I think that's again, I think that's something that's a trend that we're reconciling with now collectively as societies. So I think we're in the midst of that change right now. But essentially, you come in as a business analyst or some version of that, sometimes an intern, and then you work in those roles for a couple of years, and then you ideally go back to school, get your MBA, and come in as an associate, and then a manager, work your way up to principal, and then partner. So that's what most consultants that I have come across in my career. That's their path.
So what you just described to me is what I would call a lifer. You're in the
Yeah.
field. What about folks that may be listening that have been practitioners that are interested in switching to consulting? What do you think about that and how would somebody even do that?
I love so this is one of those like right hand left hands not talking to each other. So if you talk to consultants, they're like, "Oh, I'm getting to the end of my career. I think I'll just go into industry," as if it's like no big. I'll go be a practitioner, as if it's no big deal. But like there's a cultural shift that has to happen when you go leave consulting and go into industry, and there's a realignment because oftentimes you have a lot of independence as a consultant and a lot of ego, as you said, by the way, which is very true, tends to be. And there's just behaviors that you have to dial back if you're going to go work as a practitioner as part of a big
You mean
organization.
you actually have to care about your teammates and be nice to
Exactly.
them and build relationships?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's funny when I hear consultants say, "Oh, I'll just go into industry," as if it's like, they'll be thrilled to take me. I'm going to grace them with my presence. But what's also funny is practitioners will come to me and say, "Hey, how do I get into consulting? I want to go be I'm going to retire soon. I want to go be a consultant." And the problem with that is that consulting, well, for all the negative things, it has other skills that you need, which is like one of the first things you learn early on in consulting is to not give everything away because people will just meet with you endlessly and siphon your brain from for IC or intellectual capital and never pay you for it. And this typically happens when you have practitioners that have all this great experience, and then and then let's say you're a CPO and you've done great things at company X, and now you're going to go be a consultant. Well, you're going to dial up a CPO from company Y and say, hey, I can come help you become digital or do whatever. And they're going to talk to you 400 times and they're going to learn everything from you and then never hire you. And it's going to be compelled. The problem is this compelling because there's you get a reaction that says, when I tell somebody something exciting, I get validated. But at some point, you need to get paid too.
But it's all I mean, it's like when you get that LinkedIn note or that text message from the person, that you haven't heard from in 20 years. "Oh, can I have 30 minutes of your time or can I have an hour of your time?" It's like people wanting to continuously get information from you without ever expecting to pay.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, going back to the public speaking, that's why I charge for my event, doing those events, and I would encourage everybody else to do it. And the same is true in consulting. And I always tell folks 1 hour is the max. Like you can like I'll give you anything you want in 1 hour, but I'm not giving you anything that I'm not giving to everybody else. And otherwise you got to pay.
Mhm. So, what is it like being a consultant, like your day-to-day life? And again, I'm really curious about this because in my mind, my vision is consultants getting on a plane on Sunday and coming home on a Thursday night and eating unhealthy and being unhealthy.
Yeah, so given my trajectory, so that is correct, especially for the junior ranks. As you get promoted and you go higher in the organization, you have more accounts and more clients and more projects, and you tend to go bouncing around. So so typically you either go out Sunday or Monday. That's why living where you work can be useful
Mhm.
in the city where you do a lot of work. Here in the US, like our folks in the UK office, they just go to the office every day, and if they have to pop over to the client, they just take the tube and they're
Because what
there.
you're
And
saying is it's very local there. It's
it's
localized.
very localized. And whereas here in the US, I mean, I'll be flying across, our folks will be flying. Our office is in San Francisco. We do a lot of work in Seattle. So we've got people going back and forth to Seattle all the time, or down to Southern California, and so there is a lot of travel. And so typically the juniors will go out early on Monday and be on the client site till Thursday evening. If you ever fly Thursday night, you'll almost always it's hard to get seats because it's all the consultants going home from wherever they're going. And then and then for if you sort of play that out to the logical end, which is the partner where I'm at, I tend to go to a lot of places for a very short amount of time because as you start to do more business development, I go here to do a pitch, go there to do a steering committee meeting, go here to do whatever presentation to sort of or to sell. And so it's constantly drumming up business, selling, responding, and sort of overseeing projects.
I think this is a really important point that not all folks realize, that if you go into consulting and you move up the ranks, assuming that's, what you want to do, you want to advance, there is selling involved and a lot of selling. Often you carry a book of business and I'll have you share your experience, but from what I've seen, that can be really, really hard.
Yeah, it's a skill, and I would even say I'm not great at it. However, there's lots of definitions to selling. But the other thing I would say is I actually think you should be selling day one. But I think as a junior, you're selling yourself, and then as you grow into the role and your expertise, then you start selling the firm services, whatever it is, and I think that's often missed. And if I were to give advice to juniors is to really be confident in yourself and selling yourself, and part of selling yourself is raising your hand, it's going the extra mile, it's putting in the work.
And then how does a consultant prove their value? Again, I'm thinking, oh, these consultants just make tons of money, but how do we know they're really impacting the business and helping?
Well, if anybody of our listeners figure that out, please drop a comment. uh, so the irony here is that actually procurement consulting is very easy to quantify,
Mm,
and so if you have a spend, let's say logistics spend of I don't know $1 billion, and we come in and we save $100 million off of that. Those numbers are totally out of whack, but anyway, we'll just go with them. If I save for you $100 million, my value, and maybe you just paid me 10 million to do it, your value is that. Now, my issue with that's good, except you have to those savings will be realized over years and you will get some backsliding. And if you don't manage that category very well, that $100 million of savings, quote unquote, may only turn out to be $50 million in savings. So that's it's a little bit of my issue. Then there's sort of, and it's important to talk about the different types of consulting. There's strategy consultants, there's management consultants, which would be, I would sort of put operations consulting in there, where we're talking about this. Oftentimes when you're doing the strategy work, you're talking about capital investments, you're talking about entering new markets, you're talking about long-term changes. And so while there'll be value of shutting down 6 factories and building one super distribution center or whatever it is, those may take many years, if not decades, to realize the value. So sometimes the value is not there. And then other times it is that there's staff augmentation. Of course, you don't pay as much as that for versus the strategy folks. There's also outsourcing, which kind of falls into this, and BPA, business process outsourcing. But the other thing I would just say in terms of value is oftentimes when you're doing strategy work, sometimes it's just helping the team organize their thoughts, collect their ideas, challenge them, and then help them tell the story. And that's a lot of where my work is because you could actually know all the answers, but if you cannot articulate that story, your idea is gonna, or your presentation is gonna be dead on arrival. And sometimes you just need that outside voice to cut through the internal politics, or conversely, to have a throat to choke if it doesn't work out.
yeah, and I think it's also important whoever is procuring the consulting firm or the consultant to be really clear about what you're looking for.
Yeah,
Because what you say isn't necessarily what you actually need. Someone could
right.
type up some fancy brief and say, we need X, Y, and Z. But when you actually go in and assess and look at it, it's something that's very different. So if you are going to work with a consultant, I think you need to be crystal clear on how they're actually going to add value and what they actually should be doing for you.
Right. I mean, to take your world for a second, if you hire me to do search engine
Yeah.
optimization, assuming I know anything about it, but if you hire me to do SEO, then it may turn out very quickly to figure out that, well, you need a print like billboard strategy to go with the SEO. And so now all of a sudden our SEO project is now more broader, which may or may not be okay. And maybe you can do it. Maybe you just needed somebody to connect the dots between SEO and billboards.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm kind of bouncing around here as things come to mind. How should how sh- how should procurement organizations structure pricing for consultants? Okay, so I'm Sarah, chief procurement officer of a large financial institution, and I think I need to bring in a consulting firm to help with a couple projects. How do I even know if the pricing is fair and reasonable, and how should it be structured?
Well, it's so there are different salary or different price points, and you get what you pay for. And I don't mean that if you pay more, you get a better product. It's The cheaper you are, the more that cookie cutter template you're going to get. Whereas the more expensive is going to hopefully, not everybody does this, but put more senior resources on it and bring some insights that are different that you might not just, or legitimate expertise. I used that example of logistics before. Somebody walking in with a logistics playbook that's never has doesn't even know what multimodal transportation uh, is not the person, but you might get that person for a very cheap rate. Whereas a more experienced firm is going to bring somebody who's been doing logistics for 30 years or 35 years or doing whatever category. So you do get what you pay for. There is, of course, a question about is how much you pay up front versus
Yeah.
the what you negotiate. This is more for procurement specifically. But essentially, is you go back to my example. If I'm going to say I save you 100 million, then then that's the question is and it's going to cost you $5 million. Do you pay that up front or do you wait until to see if you can actually get that savings? And so we call that contingent work. And so your outlay is little or sometimes nothing, but there's a higher upside for us where in that scenario we would have only taken 5 million, but if we're going to do contingent, I'm making this up by the way, but we're going to take 10 million. And so sometimes contingent work can be cheaper short on the short run, but you can write big checks on the in the long run.
Yeah, I actually know a couple consultants pretty well that do the model that you described where there's no money up front. It's based off the savings. And I think that's really hard to sell, right? Nothing up front. We're going to, whatever the savings is, I just feel like a lot can happen. And then there's the whole question of, well, what is savings? When is it actually going to be? To me, that's messy.
Oh, it's totally messy, and I mean, I would say the feeling I get is that a lot of consultants don't like it either. But sometimes it's the way in, or some other firm that's they're making it very attractive to do that because what can happen is all of a sudden the like the clients forget how much could be in that upside on the back end, and then all of a
Yeah,
sudden
and
they're writing.
they look at the check and they're like, "Oh, shoot, we don't have a budget for this."
Right, exactly. So if that can be really awkward, and I've known consultants that have run into that exact problem, and then all of a sudden the client freaks out, and then anyway, yeah.
And then what about compensation for a consultant? So again, go back to the example, I'm a practitioner. Let's say I've been a CPO, I'm thinking about pivoting and going into consulting. How much should I expect to make versus what I make as a practitioner? Is it really that much more money?
I think these days it's not, and I think that's a little bit of the realization that everybody's having. Now, there are some caveats to that. So, I think as you get higher in the organization, your upside can be much bigger and unconstrained. So certainly when you get to the partner level, not me, but other partners can like the restrictions on what you can make in terms of bonus really go away, and you can and really start to make a lot of money if you're really successful. But at the mid tier, you're going to. I think they're sort of in parity. Maybe not. Maybe somebody's a little bit more, a little bit less. But where you start to get, but there are perks and there are other things that you start to see. So one of them is keeping your points and your status. So when I travel, I get to keep all my mileage points and my hotel points, and I get to use those. Some companies will take those away from their employees and force them. So not only do you not, so you travel all over the place, but you don't get to keep the miles. And then because then the company can take that as a rebate from the various companies. But then the other thing is they might force you to take the cheapest flight. Now, in consulting, you got to get wherever you got to get. And if I have to go to Minneapolis tomorrow, guess what? I'm getting on a plane and it doesn't matter what it costs, just partially because I'm charging the client. But oftentimes in practitioner company or in companies, if you're a practitioner, they can send you on the cheapest flight or they can
You have
make you
to
book.
connect flights, and then it takes a whole day, and you just lost so much work time.
Right. Or like I get to choose whatever hotel I want to, and it's at different levels, of course, but I can choose where I want to stay. Whereas if you're traveling on the corporation for, you work for the corporation, they're going to put you in the cheapest hotel, which might be across town. It might be, there's all kinds of, so there are sort of little perks like that. And then there's, like I said earlier, there's independent, like there's being independent. I set my schedule, I set my working hours. And that might be for good or bad. I work on Sundays. That's my choice. So
What advice would you have for, or what things should people think about that are listening, that are maybe considering going into consulting? Because you're very real and honest, and it's a tough life and it's a tough career. So there's definitely some pros and cons that I think really need to be considered.
I think you've hit it on a couple times. Like you have to be comfortable traveling, and I was never uncomfortable traveling, but I never set out to be a jet setter, and so I've acculturated into that lifestyle, and I don't dislike it. I don't love it, but I don't hate it, and I'm happy to do it. But it is tiring. It gets very tiring, and so I think that you have to really be okay with traveling. But don't get me wrong, it's fun. There are times when it's fun, but there are times where it's a grind. Even
Well,
if you're going to
time changes are brutal.
brutal, and you and I are on the West Coast, so going
Yeah.
east is just it hurts. It's actually easier for me to go to Europe than it is to New York or the East Coast because I can just sleep on the way over and sort of work my way through a day and then go to sleep and get right on schedule. But I go to New York, I'm all out of whack.
Mhm.
So that's number one piece of advice. Number two is talk to as many consultants as you can. And I've often said I have an open door. I'll talk to people. Again, I'm not the best person to talk to, but a lot of consultants will take that call and you can talk to them and do informational interviews and whatnot. And then my third thing is go treat it like a competition. There's nobody that's going to hold your hand. There's nobody that's going to show you the ropes. You'll learn along the way. That is an apprentice model, but you do not wait for somebody to tell you. You gotta drive and separate yourself. And I don't know if I've talked about this here, but it's a pyramid, and every from every level, only half the people make it. So if you start with 10 people at the business analyst level, you're only going to have five that make it to the associate level, and then three, and then two. Anyway, I got that wrong, but anyway, math's not my strong suit. But you really have to stand out and really show that you're a go-getter and that you're competent. And sometimes sad as it makes me and painful as it is to say, oftentimes having really good Excel or PowerPoint skills can be the difference, or being good at communicating or good at writing or good at presenting or just having a certain expertise. Those things you can control. You as a younger person, you control all that. So come in with as much of that as possible.
Mhm. And then what advice would you have for folks listening who are thinking about hiring a consultant? So I'm a procurement practitioner, I'm running a department or a team, and I'm thinking about, bringing someone in as a consultant. What should I ask and what should I consider?
Here's the secret that nobody will tell you is that all of the firms roughly, whatever it is, roughly selling the same thing. Now, some have a cookie cutter thing that's out of date and blah, 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 but you're actually hiring It's consulting's a people business. And so hire the people you're comfortable with that you feel are going to make you successful. And when you look at it that way, I think it makes it very easy. Who are you comfortable with? Because too often consulting decisions are made by who went to business school with what's the logo of the company. But at the end of the day, if you want to be successful in your project, hire people that you believe will make you successful and that will go that extra mile to make you successful. And it might be different for every project. It might be a different firm for every project. It might be a different project team, but it's got to be a good cultural fit. And yeah.
How how much do references matter? So, I've met with a few different consultants. There's 2 candidates or 2 firms that I like more than the others. Like, does it actually matter to call and talk to some clients?
Well, if you ask me for references, what am I going to do? I'm going to give you the two most
Totally.
positive, right? Like, so what's the point of that? I think we do. This is why I'm so bullish on building our social networks, like or building our networks of communities. If I'm in your shoes, I'm not going to ask for references. I'm going to call
Backdoor.
Mike at Backdoor, Mike at Procurement Foundry, or Lance at Procure Tech, or whoever, Jason at Spend Matters. Like, I'm gonna call them up and say, hey, have you ever worked with X company? And oh, by the way, like, have you worked with this person? And through the network, you'll find out that, oh my gosh, that firm was terrible. They screwed us.
Yeah, it's almost to me, I think of it just same process as hiring an internal person.
Yeah,
References are a joke. I own real estate. And it's so lame when you ask, the standard form when someone
yeah,
applies to rent your place. It's like, who's going to give you a bad reference?
right,
Just
exactly. And oftentimes, as you get to the bigger firms, they have dedicated relationships and long-standing relationships with the company, whatever the company is. So there is a long history, and sometimes you can check that history because I don't think it's any surprise that McKinsey's had some stumbles as of late. So anybody that works with McKinsey might do a little extra due diligence in thinking about what they do with them, whereas I don't know, BCG or some other firm may not have that same baggage with the organization.
Mhm. Any final closing thoughts that you want to share with the audience around consulting?
It is, as I like to say. So I've done a few lectures on this, and by the way, I think it's worth noting one of my future books is going to be about my experience in consulting. I think I always joke that it's neither, you're never conservative or liberal. It's whatever the project is. And I think that's where consultants are different because you're constantly going into unique situations. You don't always know the problem, you don't always know the answer, and you don't have to. But what you have, and so that can be very exciting and very interesting. And the work changes all the time versus doing the same thing for 10 or 20 years. And doing the same thing for 10 or 20 years, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a judgment. But sometimes if you want constant change in different types of projects, different industries, consulting can be great for that. But it is a totally different animal than anything else. And I would just say that the other thing is just observe and learn. And the best thing that's helped me, especially as an introvert, is I just keep my mouth shut and observe, and you learn so much stuff so quickly. And that might be advice not just for consulting, but it helps in consulting because even back to your perceptions of consulting, oftentimes uh, people think consultants have all the answers. They're going to walk in and tell everybody the answer. But actually, the trick is to listen and really understand what's being said and what's more importantly, what's not being said. And that can help you a lot in consulting.
Well, and I feel like the same is true for a lot of things, but especially sales. Some of the best
Yeah.
salespeople I know are very quiet and introverted.
Yeah.
That's all for today, folks. We will be back next Wednesday. If you've not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. We also have a form in the notes if you have a question about something we've spoken about in the past or a topic that you would like us to cover. Feel free to drop it in the form. And we do actually read all of the responses. So we do promise that we will take a look at it.